Welcome to Ponchatoula Live, the show where we make it easy for you to connect with the people of Ponchatoula. I'm your host, Parker Layrisson, and today I've got a fantastic guest that I literally haven't seen in decades. We went to high school together, and I've always really respected this man from afar. He's gone all around the world since then in his career in the military and as a community advocate. And now he's right up the road in Macomb, Mississippi, doing great things like writing children's books and hosting a radio show and doing much more. And I can't wait to hear his story and have him share it with you. So I bring with you, with no further ado, Kevin Brown, welcome to the show.
Hey, Parker, how you doing?
I'm great, man. Thank you for doing this. Why don't we kick things off with you just telling our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. First, I want to thank you again for having me on the show. It's a great platform. I've been watching it for the past year or so, watching different guests come on. So I'm really excited to be on your platform. You're doing a great job, and just wanted to commend you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm originally from Ponchatoula. I was born at 7th Ward General Hospital, now known as North Oaks. So I'm an old guy.
Hey, but not as old as some. I was a year ahead of you in school, and there's a lot more gray here than you got. So
right. So I've been around a little while. Grew up through the Ponchatoula School District. I went to Tucker, DC Reeves, Martha Vineyard, Ponchatoula Junior High, Ponchatoula High School. After I graduated, I went out to Atlanta. I graduated from high school, went to Atlanta to get a little bit of a more exposure experience. And after that experience, I came back to Louisiana and actually joined the Air Force.
Okay.
And that was one of those things to where it wasn't a plan coming out of high school, because I had a classmate. His name is Jarvis Jones.
Okay.
He knew back then, I think he was a junior in high school. He knew that he was going to the Air Force. And I was like,
Yeah.
That's cool. Do what you do. And he knew that he was going to get stationed in Hawaii, Hickam Air Force Base. So he had it all lined up. He knew what his career field was going to be. I wasn't one of those guys. When I was in high school, I played sports. I played football, basketball, ran track. I say ran track, but all I did was the jumping events.
Were you a wide receiver in football? I'm trying.
I was.
Yeah, you were a really good player. I remember that. Yeah.
And free safety.
Okay.
Football, and then so the track did that. And
you were part of those teams where Ponchatoula kind of made that comeback. We went from kind of obscurity to winning district championships and making the playoffs for the first time in a while. So congrats on that, man. Y'all had a squad back in the day.
Yeah, we had a good run. I remember some of those guys. Most of the time when I was in high school, Martinez Lewis was the quarterback. I think the last 2 years.
Yeah, and a great one at that. I coached his nephew in basketball last year. Okay. I was blessed. Our mutual friend Marshall Graves and I coached together, and we stumbled into the number 1 pick in the draft. It's kindergartners and first graders, so none of them have played before, and so there's no ratings on the players, and we don't know. And my kid's not all-star material, I guess, on the basketball court. But all you can do is go by their parents, right?
That's
so
right.
I saw Martinez's sister Christy on the list, and I said, "Oh, he must be good." And sure enough, he was. But yeah, you're talking about a local legend there, and a heck of a guy. But I got to see him a lot in basketball season last year. Great guy. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no worries.
To add a little color when you're talking about people I love.
Yeah, Christy, great athlete. She
absolutely.
Basketball. Track. She actually had a sports health type organization I think she has going on down there.
Yeah, she and her husband LaTerrence, they do great with it, man. They're a great power couple, man. Yeah.
Right. And I actually saw them about either a month or 2 ago here in Macomb.
Come on. What were they doing up there?
A musical event. There was an event going on at the Palace Theater downtown Macomb here, and they were attending. And I saw them from way across the place. So I walked over and I said, "Hey, my name's Kevin Brown." And he extended his hand to shake my hand, and then he looked at me. And we used to go to church together over on 11th Street. So
whoa, what a small world!
Yeah, that's how much time had passed.
Yeah,
but we picked up right where we left off.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
Well, they're great folks. You're talking about growing up here, and I'm going to circle back because I want to hear about your childhood in Ponchatoula. Because I'm sure it has colored your entire life and adulthood and how you're raising kids now.
For sure.
But you mentioned this transition to Atlanta and back, and it caught my attention, kind of you couldn't really have too much different places in the world than itty bitty Ponchatoula, population 7,000 now, and Lord knows how much smaller back then, to Atlanta. What was that like, and what did you learn when you left, this little Mayberry experience and hit the big city at such a young age?
One of the biggest differences was the diversity is a lot bigger.
Right.
But I saw people doing a lot of different things, and I saw a lot of different ethnicities. Growing up in Ponchatoula, it was basically black and white when we were
right.
So to go out to Atlanta and see all those people from different backgrounds and how they interacted with each other. I'm a sociology major, so I'm really interested in how society works, right? So to go out there, that was the biggest culture shock, just to see different people and different roles and how they all work together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How all this stuff functioned. So that kind of turned my mind towards want to explore a little bit more. So when I came back to Louisiana, I had traveled in my youth, but it was mostly regionally. To Houston, to Mobile, regional areas.
Yeah, same here. You kind of had that Pensacola to Houston stretch, that's cool. But I can relate to that because I left here at 18 to go to school in New Orleans. Didn't go as far as you. Tulane, yeah, you got it. Yeah. Nice 10-win team. And we got while we're giving shout outs to great Ponchatoula athletes, congratulations to Tajay Spears, who just ran for 181 yards and scored 2 touchdowns. And he's going to the senior bowl and led my alma mater there to a great season. It's been so neat to watch him, kick butt. But back to your point of diversity, when I left here, the only Jew I knew was Jesus, right? I mean, growing up in Ponchatoula, maybe we had a few Jews in town. I didn't know that they were Jewish. It just wasn't a thing. And you get to a school where it's a third Jewish, roughly, maybe. And it's like, wow, it's culture shock. And your mind opens up to all these things. So it sounds like you had a real kind of diversity enlightenment going on. I want to share, if you don't mind, some comments here, because you're getting a lot of love as our show gets started, and I want to share that. So I don't know if you can read this on your screen, but you can see here, Rashawn White has chimed in to say that he loves what you're doing. And I'll show a few other comments he's got here. Thank you, Mr. White, for tuning in. This is really neat.
Appreciate it.
To see that. And he says you've come a long way. But he's not alone. Our dear old friend Felicia Elsie. Hey, Felicia. Thank you for tuning in. She says hello. And also we've got Paula Coleman on here.
That's my cousin.
She says, come on with it, fam. Paula, thank you for tuning in. So to anyone else watching live, look, here we go. We got more comments coming in by the second. Just know that we have the ability to post your comments. So if you're family like Paula and you haven't seen Kev in a while and you want to, say hey, do so. If you've got a question about anything we talk about, please come on and I'll do my very best to work it into the show. So we're here with Kev Brown. He's now in Macomb. He's from Ponchatoula. He told us a little bit about being born and bred here and then going off to Atlanta at a young age, right out of high school. Why don't we circle back and talk childhood in Ponchatoula?
Sure.
You mentioned church on 11th Street back in the day.
Straight way.
Tell us about what you remember from childhood in Ponchatoula.
Okay, so from childhood, we started out, my mom and my dad, I had a 2-parent household along with my sister, and I had 2 brothers. I'm the youngest. We started out in Little Flower housing project down there off Railroad Avenue. And we were in 108 Little Flower. And our neighbor, talk about some full circle stuff, 109 was Devin Green, the Greens. And I just reunited with him like a year ago on a whole nother level.
That's really cool.
That I'll get to. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, please. I can't wait to hear about that.
So, we moved from there. Maybe I think I was 8 or 9 over to the community called Millville. That's closer to the service road.
Right.
And some of the differences from moving from that housing project to the single family home was that our house faced Interstate 55. So every day when I left my house, I saw cars going up and down 55. And the impact that it had on me was that everybody's going somewhere. So I used to visualize or wonder where those people were going. You could also see the flight path for people coming into Louis Armstrong, the aircraft, right? A lot clearer from that side. Those things I attribute to my travels, my interest in travel, and being curious about where these roads go to. The aircraft, I ended up being an aircraft mechanic in the Air Force. So my interest in aircraft and things like that. My mom, she was really devoted to education. So one of the things that she did, there used to be these traveling encyclopedia sales people. And she bought a set, she paid installment payments on it. And
I'm smiling big right now because the other lawyer in my office here, Leon Christ, who's in his mid-60s, used to be a traveling encyclopedia
it might have been him.
and he did it. It was one of his college jobs, but he only saw one set, so I don't think he ever made it to Ponchatoula. But he talked about how difficult that job was. It's really sales. I mean, he's a great persuader in the courtroom. He's our lead trial attorney. But selling encyclopedias was, so that's neat that your mom got one of those. That's my dad's dear friend Hobby Morrison in Hammond once read an encyclopedia cover to cover over a very long period, right? But that's neat. Young folks with the internet, anybody who grew up with one of these can't relate to that. But please continue. I know that was a big investment, so I'm sure that was a big sacrifice for your parents to make.
It was a big deal. But that investment that she put into it, neither one of my parents graduated high school, not even past junior high. But they believed in education and what it afforded a kid, right, to set them on a particular path. So I used to just sit in our living room and I used to just flip through those pages, looking and reading information, looking at destinations, Dubai, Paris, Czech Republic, Nigeria. It didn't matter, right? I was just interested in places. So I think that allowed me to visualize those places before I even got to go to them, because I ended up going to most of those places. I've been to 48 states. I've lived in numerous countries and visited different countries, pretty much every region of the world. But all that started in that living room with those encyclopedias that my mom took the time to, set aside some money to make sure that our education continued. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was a great investment, and it's something that I tell my kids all the time, because like you said, these everything's here now. But to sit down and go through those books, and I was really, really interested in demographics. I mean, I could tell you the population of the largest cities now, all the way till now from back then. But that was something that I was really interested in. So I was interested in sociology at an early age, and it was great that she saw that and she connected those things so that I can continue down that path.
What a visionary, and to come from humble beginnings, like you mentioned, and not having seen the world like you have, but to make the sacrifices and to share with you a path.
Right.
That's really special. So you mentioned your mom's role in that. What about your dad? How did he contribute to
he was what we used to call the breadwinner. He brought home the bacon. He always worked. He worked a lot of he
paid for the encyclopedias.
Right. He both of them worked, but he worked out of Norco in like Destrehan area, going to where he was.
Yeah, sure.
And but he had a lot of odd jobs. So on the weekends, he did landscaping. So I went with him. We used to get up at 5 a.m, load those mowers on the truck, stop at Bootsy's Deli. It's not there no more. And
tell me, I miss it, man.
Yeah,
I know.
We used to stop there and get breakfast biscuits, and we'd eat.
Best biscuits ever.
Yeah, and then we'd go to the work sites. We used to work. We used to clean Hammond Square Mall parking lot every weekend, and we didn't have a sweeper truck. It was a broom and a dustpan. We used to cut apartments, a lot of apartment complexes in Hammond. So he always worked. That's what I got from him, was his work ethic. There was no excuses. He just got after it. So he had his primary job, and he had all of these odd jobs, side jobs that I was a part of. So I got to see that firsthand, including the Ponchatoula auction. I worked at the Ponchatoula auction.
Tell us about that. I don't think anybody's mentioned that on the show yet.
Yeah. The Ponchatoula Antique Auction is where J.R. Rockers. What is it?
Yeah, Jay Ruckers. You're right. Yeah, Jay
Yeah,
Ruckers. Soul
it's
food.
where it is now, right? So back in the day, in the I would say 80s and 90s, Mr. Stanley Cohen owned that. He had two sons, Ashley Cohen and Lee Cohen. And Lee Cohen owned the record store in Hammond off of Railroad Avenue back then. He had a record store there. I forgot what the Records Express or something like that. Music Express, something like that. And but yeah, so Mr. Stanley Cohen hung out with them quite a bit growing up. But he had the Ponchatoula Antique Auction, and my dad worked there, so of course I worked there. And I remember when they were auctioning off items, we brought them up to the front so the customers could have a better view of them. And I remember being like, I don't know, I was like 12 or 13, and there was a marble top table. It had some weight to it. It weighed more than me, and I was struggling with that
marble.
thing. Yeah, but overall, good experience. We used to load people's trucks up when they would come in town to make those purchases and take them back out to their distribution points. So yeah, a lot of people, a lot of interaction with work experience growing up. Yeah.
It sounds like you had a perfect combination and complementary parents that enabled you to, dream and reach for the stars, but keep your feet firmly planted on the ground with a strong work ethic and realize that it was going to take hard work to get there. And I think that's a pretty, unfortunately rare combination, to find a household where you're getting all of that encouragement. So that's really special. I commend your parents for that. You mentioned being the baby, the youngest, of the kids. Let's talk about your siblings. What was that like? Because I'm second of four boys, and we're really spread out, so I can't really relate to that. Looking up at nothing but older brothers or sisters. What was that experience like for you?
So we're really spread out too. My parents were a lot older. My mom was 36 when she had me, right? So we're pretty spread out. My oldest brother, I have a niece that's older than me. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then my next brother, he's probably 61, 62. And then my sister's only 5 years older than me. So we grew up the closest. My siblings were basically my first cousins in the town. My mom had three sisters. And they all started out in Little Flower. So back at that time, most of my cousins in my age group were like my siblings. From around town and different places.
And did they stay around here in Ponchatoula, or did they go off like you all around the world?
Most of them, a lot of them stayed around in Ponchatoula. Canante over there on 11th.
Absolutely,
so those are my people.
Okay.
And then over on First Street, I'm related to the Harts. So that's Tajay's mom, Nicole Hart.
Right.
So Larry Terry is one of my cousins.
Man, speaking of legendary athletes, what a basketball player he was. Wow.
Right. So just going around town, that's a big network of relatives, quite a few. In a town like that. Even though my parents weren't originally from Louisiana, as they came, more of their siblings and things came and kind of branched out like that.
Sure. So we're getting some more great comments on here. Felicia's chiming in about Millville, and also Bootsies. I love to see the love for Bootsies because, you, I love those big cat head biscuits they made in the morning. Daddy used to get us those before we go hunting. And as a kid, you might remember if you brought your report card into Bootsies, remember that?
Hook you up,
It hook you up, man. It was like 50 cents for an A or something. If any burger restaurants are out there watching, we need to inflate these for today's dollars. But it was a great concept. And Miss Debbie Gildner has been kind enough to share. Was it Music Express? Was that the?
That's what it was.
Thank you, Miss Debbie. We appreciate you chiming in. A mother there, some great Ponchatoula athletes and coaches, and Cody and Billy. So again, folks, we're here with Kev Brown. We're talking about the good old days in Ponchatoula, and it's been a great, run down memory lane. Before we jet into your career and all the great things you're doing now, let's talk a little bit about PHS, because as you remember, as you mentioned, I should say, you were, a jock at PHS. You were a very successful athlete at a time when these teams are doing well, playing with great contemporaries like Martinez Lewis and Charlie Landry and all these great guys, great players. But looking back, what do you remember fondly about your Ponchatoula High days?
I remember the the school, I remember feeling that it was a first class education. I felt like it was a little bit of a step above from some of our rivals academically, because the boundaries were like a lot more solid. You couldn't get into too much stuff and continue your education at Ponchatoula High School. So the guardrails were there for a reason, and that's some of the things that I noticed that were a lot different from our rival schools and things like that. I remember the teachers, Miss Clark specifically, Mr. Coach Grigas. Of course, I played basketball.
We've done a lot of talking about those guys over there. Miss Clark, her son Peronis came on the show, and Tyra was on the show. Now McGarry, then Wilson, and Miss Clark was just a legend. But I love that you mentioned Coach Grigas, one of my favorite teachers of all time. I didn't get to play for him like you did, but tell us about what you remember about Coach Grigas. He was such a fun, enthusiastic guy.
He was, and he had that Chicago background, so it was a little bit of an introduction of something different culturally, the way that he communicated and things like that. But I had him for free enterprise, and I remember going through the newspaper. So now we got Robinhood, we got all these apps that we can do our stocks on, right? But we went through the newspaper and we picked out stocks, and there was the competition to see who was going to make the most profit by group, by the end of the semester, whatever the case may be. So just introducing those things. And he was always the same. He was the same in the classroom as he was on the basketball courts. He was always direct. And I had a transition with Coach Grigas. My dad passed away when I was 16 in Ponchatoula. So at the funeral, Coach Grigas was there and Mr. Allen was there. And they got up and spoke. And I'm sure they would do that for everybody. But at that time, it felt like a really big deal because they helped me a lot. They helped me get my first job. They did a lot of things to keep a kid that's going through that sort of experience on track, because it's easy to go kind of wayward. Right. When the Superman of the house is gone. So they did a lot of things that helped to keep me on track. And anytime I can shout them out, I always try to do that because it made a big difference. And it led to what I do today. It's kind of paying it forward for all those people that reached out and invested in me to show me the options that are out there. And it's up to me, it's up to me and how I pursue those things.
Well, thank you for sharing that. My dad lost his father at about the same age, and everything you say just echoes in things I've been growing up hearing my whole life about the importance of these other men in the community stepping up to fill that void as best they can. So I appreciate you giving shouts out to good men who helped you there. But you mentioned it led to what you're doing now. Let's talk about that. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into all the countries you've lived in 48 of 50 states, although we can maybe circle back and touch on some of that. But right now you're doing really important things in your community on radio, in print, in many different platforms. And I'd love to hear about it. So tell us what you're up to.
Okay, so I retired from the Air Force in 2017, right? That's all of my adult life. So I was kind of indoctrinated. This is how life is after doing 21 years in a system, right? So I was kind of curious as to what I was going to do next. And it's weird because I've been a civilian before, obviously, but I had been in the military so long that there was kind of an anxiety about becoming a civilian again. And there's a lot of
that. No, we all think of Shawshank Redemption, and I know we're talking very different situations. But when you're used to a routine, I mean, does that ring a bell?
Yeah, institutions, right? That's basically what happened. So I had a lot of anxiety about what I was going to do, how I was going to go into the civilian population again. And there's a lot of things that go into that. But basically, I decided that I needed a routine. I traveled for a year. When I retired, I traveled for a solid year. Going all over the world, just doing whatever, right? Trying to decompress. So when I settled here in Mississippi. My mom lives in the region, right? And I needed to be relatively close to her. That's why I chose this town. My mom's 82 now. So I needed to be.
And I know from the book that your grandmother once lived there too, right? Did your mom grow up in Macomb?
No, she didn't. She didn't. Okay. That's my grandmother on my dad's side. That's my mom, my dad's mom. So so I moved here, and and I needed a routine. So I went into the school system, started teaching, and that was great. I always wanted to be a coach, so I was working my way towards that, right? Giving back, being influenced by those great coaches and administrators and educators that I grew up under, right? So I got into that space, and COVID hit, and that spring break I didn't go back because I didn't understand how the thing worked, and I didn't want to take it home to my mom at her age. So that's when I started delving into community work. And my grandmother had a store here in Macomb in the 40s and 50s. I never met my grandmother. She died in 68. I just knew of it. And when I was in the military, I visited some family in Minnesota. And during that time, they gave me some tax deeds and said, hey, take care of this taxes on this property. It's down in Macomb, Mississippi. I'm like, okay. I don't live in Macomb. I've never lived in Macomb. I have no intent on living in Macomb.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, through the way God works, right? I end up living in Macomb, and then going over and visiting the property. And so I go out and I look at this property, and it's overgrown. It's like a mini forest, and it's like trash inside of it. Mattresses, shell casings, all these things, right?
So it sounds like just years and years of neglect piling up, no attention to it, no care. Is that right?
That's basically what it was. And it's right next to a housing project. So I was sitting there and I was watching, and I watched the kids come out of their living area space into this, which I call the inspiration desert at the time. And I started considering, what does this do to a kid's mind? Already knowing that, but I'm in a different place. So I'm watching this. So that's when I decided to start getting it under control. And then it took it like a year. So I'm out there solo in somebody else's space, basically.
Because you're not living right there. You're in Macomb, but you're not on site. This is not you're next door, right? Okay.
No, I don't have no spokesman. I don't have nobody, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Saying that this guy is okay or anything like that. But it all worked out. I went out there for a year straight. We got it all down, and we started planting. There's a art teacher here named Sarah Doman, and she has a flower farm. So we were working on different things in the community as far as art goes, and she donated my first flowers. So she came out, she planted them because I didn't know anything about that either.
Oh, that's cool.
So every time
my mom would dig this part of the story. She loves planting stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Planting seeds of hope. That's what the garden is about. So we every time I would get discouraged with what was going on, I would see a bloom, from these plants that she planted. So that kind of kept me in the game long enough to move to the next step, which was engagement with the stakeholders in the community, the kids.
Right.
So right across from the garden, what we're calling the garden now, was a row of apartments, and there were always kids there. And
is it a spoiler alert for me to share the name of the garden or to ask you to? Because I think it's pretty neat. You named it for your grandmother. It's Gertrude's Garden, right?
Gertrude's Garden, yeah. And her name was Gertrude Hughes.
Okay.
And the store was called Hughes Grocery Store. It was a small store.
Very neat store.
Yeah, but like I said, I didn't know her or anything like that. This is just oral history that's been passed down.
Yeah.
And somebody paid the taxes, so I still had the opportunity to engage it. But looking at the site, it wasn't commercially viable for anything because of the condition of it and the foot traffic and a lot of things that were going on. So we got it down and we started planting. The first season, we only planted flowers because we didn't know how the community was going to react to a community garden in that space because it was new. It's not new anywhere else, but it was new in that space. So these kids, I started calling them the garden kids. They were the kids that had a line of sight from their apartment to the garden. There was no obstructions, right, around different buildings and things like that. So every day they used to watch me, and eventually they came over, and we started talking.
And when you say kids, how old are these kids? Little bitties or
from 6 to 18?
Okay,
we're talking about 4 years now.
Yeah.
So I've watched them grow over 4 years. But the youngest is 6, and the oldest is 18. In our focus group.
Okay.
So we have
that's so cool. So you're out there transforming their daily, like their front yard, the first thing they see when they walk out the door. And after a while of seeing this random dude, I guess you build the trust up that you're there for good purposes.
Right.
And clearly you've developed a relationship. What's that been like, getting to know these kids and involving the community?
It's been enlightening. A lot of times it takes me back to my childhood. I see myself in a lot of those kids, or I see my peers that I grew up with and a lot of those kids. So it's almost like a time machine.
Yeah.
I always reference that, and I said, we can't necessarily go back in time, really, but we can go back and invest in our younger selves, right? Those versions of our younger selves, and that's called mentoring. That's what it is, because we've been where they're trying to go. So we have that context, not to plant goals in them, but to understand their goals and kind of light the pathway for them to pursue it. You know what I mean? Because there was always these things that all of us wanted to do, but we didn't necessarily have the insight of knowing about how to even approach it.
Yeah.
So with the space, it's a garden. It's called Gertrude's Garden, but it's really what we call a platform for dreams, because we do programming there. So we do yoga out there. We do art classes out there. We've had horse clubs come out. We do, the whole space, and it's just a slab. Yeah. There's nothing special about it.
Man.
You know what I mean? Besides the plants, it's just a concrete slab.
But now it's a clean, beautiful space with flowers and all.
Yeah, flowers, art.
Yeah.
We have structures out there, and the kids do all that work. So the businesses donate the paint, because we're not a 501c. This is all organic, person-to-person contact. So,
well, let me make this offer here. If you need any help with that, one of the things we do for fun at our office is on a pro bono basis, for no cost, no fee, we will help people doing good things like you are set up nonprofits. So, for example, earlier we mentioned Marshall Graves. He's got a great outreach ministry 2 blocks from my office. They meet at the community center, and they play a little bit of basketball, and they do a lot of talking about life and God and helping kids get on the right track. So, whether we're helping him or my Little Bikes for Kids program, my point is just that if you need some help with that, if you want to become a 501c3, follow up with me after the show, and we'll be happy to help, because what you're doing great things. That's exciting, and it may help you, expand your donor base and get more money. That's really cool, man.
Yeah. So that's basically what happened with the garden. People always say, well, what about this and what about that, when they come out to the space, right?
Yeah.
And I'm big on go ahead and do it. You know what I mean? Because if you're just giving me ideas, that's great. But I only got 2
You're
hands.
clearly a man of action. You told us about being raised with your daddy and cleaning a Hammond Square parking lot hand with a broom.
Yeah,
we get that. Now, look, we have run over. I told you I'd get you out of here in about a half hour, and I'm 5 minutes over. I want to make sure we talk about this wonderful book that you wrote, because I live on a street named St. Augustine. Is something I've read to my kids and brought home, and we love it. And it is kind of a history. You mentioned oral histories. It's a wonderful history of your town, that garden, the surrounding space, the neighborhood, and learning of everything from Bo Diddley and Ray Charles to what's going on now. It's wonderful. So tell us about that. How did this come to be? And tell us where we can get it, and all about that, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I live on a street named St. Augustine. St. Augustine is actually the street that runs right next to the garden.
Okay.
So those kids that I was talking about, those garden kids that I'm looking across the street at, that's where the majority of them live. They're the residents of St. Augustine. And,
I'm sorry for mispronouncing. You've been around the world and knew the right way to pronounce that.
No.
I just know St. Aug, that team that keeps beating everybody in football. So
in New Orleans,
for politely correcting me.
My predecessor used to correct me all the time on the radio.
Yeah.
So that was a shout out to her, Miss Fern Crossley, which she's on the dedication page of this book. But those kids were primarily the focus group of kids for Gertrude's Garden. So we actually were looking at it like, we used to say the neighborhood was under-resourced, and then we switched to say it was underutilized, because everything you need is there. And there's a narrative about that neighborhood, or there has been a negative narrative about pretty much don't go over there for a different variety of reasons, right? But this is where they live. No one chooses what they're born into, right? So what are the assets in this community that has this negative connotation? So these sites in this book, these historical sites and these famous people, athletes, musicians, artists. It's not even the whole neighborhood, because the neighborhood is called Berglund, right? It's a few blocks from St. Augustine. So what we did was we identified those sites, did some research with the kids, gave them the information, folders, all of them had a folder of information. And we took a walking tour within 2 blocks of St. Augustine. And we identified all these historic sites because they're like legit historic. You know what I mean?
Right.
Not just locally. So because it's on the Blues Trail, there's about to be a civil rights marker placed there. There's all this stuff within a few blocks of their home, but you grow up on the street and you don't even know the history of who this person was. Because I asked them. That's where it started. I asked them, do they know who that is? And then, of course, nobody knew. And then the research started identifying these assets within a 2-block radius of their street. So the whole thing was to look at what you have. It's a treasure, and it makes you feel different about your environment, in turn, making you feel different about yourself and what you have to do. So
that's just beautiful, man. I commend you for what you're doing. It's inspiring and educational and so much more. I have neglected to keep up with our comments, folks, so forgive me for that. We were talking about Pete Clark earlier, and so Felicia was kind of throw that out. Coach Wilkinson, we were talking about some old PHS legends, and he says it's nice hearing about some of the folks from his era.
Steve
Anyway, we've got so many here, folks, and we're running out of time, so I'm going to kind of run through here to share a few with Kev as we close down. And speaking of Kevs, I see Kevin Brumfield, my old teammate. We played on the St. Joe basketball team together. He much better than I. I was on the bench, but
Kevin's a good guy.
Great guy. Good to see you.
We've kept in touch all this time too.
Oh, that's great. Good to hear that, man.
Rashawn, we actually had a rap group back in the day.
Oh, tell us about that. I want to hear about that. Yeah.
No, I'm not gonna go into it, but it was me, him, and I believe his brother Sam and Terrence McGarry. I think that was the group.
Oh, nice.
Back then, we had a rap group back then.
What a crew.
I'm glad he's doing well, and Kevin as well. Kevin, we've caught up some games, and actually Jeff, I'm gonna have a hard time saying his last name. He went to school with us too.
Leicestershire.
Yeah,
good buddy. He's been on the show too. Yeah.
Guess where I saw him at?
Where'd you see Jeff?
In Green Bay, Wisconsin, when LSU went to play Wisconsin.
You gotta be kidding me.
Yeah, he was tailgating. They were tailgating.
Oh my gosh, that's
Mr.
wild.
Paul's Cafe. Yeah, all of them were out there, and we were walking by because one of my other cousins, his name is Leon Brown. He's a Ponchatoula athletic legend too, right? And Mr. Peavy saw him and said, BB Brown. Right. And they connected, and then I connected with Jeff and his brother. But in Green Bay, Wisconsin, that's crazy.
That's small.
Just walking around.
It just shows you how small the world is. That's amazing. But yeah, he's one of my dearest friends and great guy. I guess y'all played football together, which explains the connection. Paula's talking about getting support for your book in Minnesota. So it's kind of neat to hear. Not only do the stories of this show reach all over, but this little bitty Ponchatoula shows reach in Minnesota. So Paula, thanks for tuning in from up there, and Kev, thanks for getting us that kind of spread. We don't see that every day here at Ponchatoula Live. So as I mentioned, we have to keep a tight schedule today because these little kids are expecting me to show up and help Coach Marshall. But it's been a real pleasure catching up with you, old friend, and to hear how well you're doing. And please know I'm absolutely sincere in the offer to help you guys, through your program. And I love. We'll talk off the show, but it's just great to hear you doing such wonderful things because it inspires those of us around here when we think about what we could do here in Ponchatoula for the kids where you grew up in Little Flower or Millville or wherever. Just man, the opportunities are endless, and hopefully we'll get you back on the show. We'll do a round 2 and maybe come up with some bright ideas for how we can take that kind of inspiration, full circle back to here where you came up. But before we close out, I just want to ask Kev, is there anything on your mind, on your heart, anything at all you'd like to share with our listeners and our viewers before we go?
Sure. From a community advocate perspective, I always tell people that to not wait. If it's been put in your heart to do something, you don't have to wait till you have all the resources or everything in line. Just do what you're naturally gifted to do. And that may just be when you see some youth walking down the sidewalk, because a lot of people like to say, I stay out of the way and things like that. Just speak to them. Just say hello. Start that conversation. What are y'all, what are y'all up to? Not in an invasive way, but what y'all got going on today? Just regular conversation, because most of the time the disconnect happens is because we're not engaging anymore. So
great
we
advice.
become foreign to each other. So that's my biggest thing. Be your authentic self and don't wait. Just look for ways to incorporate what you've already been gifted to do into the community needs. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to create a great success.
Yeah. Wonderful advice. So there you have it, folks. We've gotten some great advice from a great man who came up right here in our own home community, and now he's doing great things up that interstate that he used to watch out of his back door in Macomb. So don't be a stranger, Kevin Brown. Next time you come to town, hit me up. I'd love to take you for coffee, lunch. You mentioned Paul's Cafe. I'll be happy to foot the bill. Let's go do it, man. It'd be great to catch up. So to our viewers who stuck in with us to the end, thank you all. It's been a pleasure. We will be back here next week. So have a great week. Take care.